At sunrise, when Machu Picchu takes its first breath of light and the terraces ignite like scales on a sleeping dragon, a 29-year-old teacher from Glasgow named Rowan Calder stops moving. Rowan always moves, footsteps as fidgets, camera clicks as punctuation. But now, halfway along a narrow ledge between the sacred plaza and the Temple of the Sun, stillness take hold. The stone before them is river smooth, lichen rimmed, and scored with letters that should not be there. Rowan Calder, not initials, not a generic Rowan, the whole name, precise as a passport, and beneath it, a date, 1520. The guide, a Quechua historian named Mariela Vargas, has spent years teaching visitors how to see without touching, how to read the sun on doorframes, how to feel the weight of engineering by watching runoff channels catch the mountain's tears. Her training, the park orientation, and the international pleas has made her alert to damage, to the cruel modern habit of leaving names on what outlived their owners by centuries. But this is not tourist scrawl. The incision has an oxidized patina, softened by time, its edges feathered under lichen. It sits at shoulder height, in a block whose quarry marks a line with Inca masonry technique. No mortar, blades of light thin joins. Rowan's hands find their pockets and stay there. It's not possible, they say, and it is a reasonable objection. The Inca did not use the Latin alphabet. Spanish scripts did, and early colonial hands sometimes carved names and dates, illegitimate claims in stone. But Rowan is not Spanish, and the surname is Scottish. The spelling matches perfectly to the modern passport Rowan showed to enter the sanctuary that morning after a night train and a fog-wreathed bus ride. Mariela's first thought, hoax, is punctured by that patina. Second thought, coincidence, staggers under the weight of full name duplication and a date that predates Rowan's great-great-great anyone. Mariela radios the site office. The park has procedures: flag the area, document, notify conservation. The last thing anyone wants is a viral scandal about vandalism in a UNESCO treasure. In the last decade, too many visitors have pressed knife and key into ancient skin, from Petra's sandstone corridors to Italian amphitheaters, provoking bans, fines, and international outrage. But here, under Andean sky, the past seems to have written forward. Rowan tries humor as a tourniquet. Maybe I'm older than I look. It lands briefly and then falls away. Their grandmother Isla used to tell a story about a Calder who wandered, a cartographer who went too far chasing lines on rough paper. Family myth. Fog takes the terrace and lifts. Rowan leans in one last time, reads their own name, and feels a small internal shift, as if some hinge has been found that was always there. The site office logs the incident, photographs the inscription at staged angles, and calls Cusco's Regional Directorate of Culture. A conservator named Beltran arrives by noon, breathing thin air and protocol. He dusts the letters with soft goat hair brushes, checks for freshly crushed lichen, and measures the micro-pitting at the groove edges. He frowns in the language of people who have seen too many fresh scratches masquerading as age. Then he stops frowning. It has weathered, he says quietly. If it is a forgery, it is decades old. Two facts surface, each like a hand pulling the story in opposite directions. First, Machu Picchu's modern discovery to outsiders came in 1911 with Hiram Bingham's expedition, after local farmers guided him up the ridge. Anything on these stones before that is either Inca, local, or early colonial, but Spanish presence that high is scant in early records. Second, the date, 1520, falls during the reign of Inca Huayna Capac, a year before smallpox traveled south and a decade before the fall of the empire. A Spanish hand carving a Scottish name here in 1520 misaligns with known timelines. Pause and reflect. In archaeology, anomalies are invitations and traps. They seduce with the promise of hidden corridors through history, and punish sloppy stepping with embarrassment and lost trust. The right move is patience, documentation, and comparative analysis. Beltran requests a non-invasive 3D scan. Back in Cusco, a lab overlays the microtopography of the groove against reference samples of 16th century inscriptions taken from Cusco's colonial walls, Spanish names carved into Inca foundations during the early decades after conquest. The curves, the V profile, the tool chatter, some match, some resist. The letters R and W stand out. Early Spanish carvers used V for U, rarely a symmetrical W, and Rowan contains a letter not common in Iberian names of the period. Rowan in a small hostel near Aguas Calientes cannot sleep. They search digitized parish records, ship registries, and Scottish naming histories. Calder is old, tied to river names and to a clan near Inverness. But 1520? The internet gives legends and lists, then stumbles. An email pings back from a volunteer at a Scottish diaspora archive. There is a Calder mentioned in a 16th century merchant ledger tied to Seville, a Scot working odd maritime jobs, name uncertain in the smear of ink, possibly R. Calder. No first name legible. The ledger is dated 1519 to 1522. Tension peak 1 hits in the park office. A ranger recognizes the surname. Calder. Wasn't that the name on the 1973 incident report? He fishes out a paper file, a conservation note from a British traveler detained briefly after rubbing charcoal into a faint inscription to make it readable for a photograph. The traveler's surname, Calder. First name, Isla. The fine was minor. The note adds, inscription appears old. Traveler insists it had family connection. Rowan's grandmother. The world narrows. Family stories were not fog after all. They were smoke from something still burning. Rowan calls home. Isla's memory has been fraying, but when Rowan says stone, Isla answers with a map in her voice. Your great-uncle said our Calder came here, after Seville, following a cartographer who chased the world's spine. He said there was a name waiting. I thought it was a way to get children to love a place they'd never see. Mariella tracks down a second thread. At Petra, guides sometimes point to traveler graffiti from the 19th century. Names cut near tombs long before UNESCO existed, layered palimpsests of vanity and wonder. Some are now studied as artifacts of visitation, not celebrated, but contextualized, evidence of how modernity first touched ancient stone. If the Calder name is authentic and early, it might be the kind of bitter artifact, an intrusive record that itself became history. Tension Peak 2 arrives with the lab's preliminary. The patina's biochemical signature suggests long-term exposure, decades to centuries, consistent with mid-20th century at the latest, possibly earlier. But the letter forms are not purely 16th century Iberian. They resemble a 19th or 20th century hand mimicking older styles with a distinctly modern W. Conclusion: the carving could be old, but not 1520 old. The date might be part of the message, not the timestamp. Beltran returns with a conservative verdict. The inscription is intrusive but historically layered, likely carved between the 1920s and 1970s by a person attempting to memorialize an earlier story or to forge lineage into landscape. The 1520 is less a date than a claim, a kind of family myth pinned to stone. The weathering suggests it predates modern mass tourism restrictions, aligning with an era when traveler graffiti at ancient sites, though condemned today, was more common and less policed. Rowan reads the report and feels two opposing currents. Relief. This was not destiny written by a ghost in 1520. Grief. The shiver of impossible connection dissolves into a human hand with a knife in the last 100 years. Then a small third current, subtler. The knife was also a message. Crude, damaging, wrong, but born out of longing. Someone with Rowan's name, or for Rowan's name, wanted to be known across time. Mariella arranges a final visit under supervision. Tape cordons the block. A placard will soon be installed, not to celebrate the carving, but to contextualize and deter. Rowan stands in the mist again and says, "If my grandmother darkened it to photograph it, then my family didn't make the name." They tried to read it. The ranger nods. Reading can also harm when the page is stone. The line lands with a weight that feels ancient. Twist: in the archive of the 1973 incident report is a photo, grainy, high contrast. On the reverse, handwritten, "For R. Calder, who crossed an ocean chasing a line on a map." Signed, I. Calder. The earliest verifiable R. Calder is still likely the merchant near Seville, a life recorded only in ink smears, not in stone. But the story traveled, changing hands and alphabets, until someone tried to anchor it where the clouds come to rest. Immediate aftermath. The directorate will include the inscription in a catalog of historical vandalism used in visitor education about why even touching can be harm. Rowan and Isla speak again. It was real enough to us, Isla says, which is both confession and absolution. Rowan agrees to record an oral history, to keep the story where it belongs, in voices, not in scars. Over the next year, the inscription becomes a footnote in trainings for guides, a cautionary tale of how longing for connection can turn into harm, and how even harmful acts can become data, folded into the site's history without being excused. Across the world, from Petra's rose-red corridors to hilltop citadels, parks wrestle with the same paradox: how to let people feel close to the past without letting them touch it into disappearance. There's a question left on the ledge where Rowan stood. When the past refuses to say our names, what right do we have to speak them into the past? The human need to be known is profound, but some silences are a kind of life support. Remove them, and the patient dies. Perhaps the better inheritance is story, meticulously cited, gently told, leaving stone to its own endurance.
Don't forget to subscribe to Real Mystery Reports for more strange, dark, and profoundly human stories. New true mysteries every day.